This meeting is being recorded.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Howdy.
Morning.
Ignore me for a moment. I'm just making sure that all of the people that are coming in are actually admitted. We'll start shortly. Is Louis already on the call?
Recording in progress.
Exposure to, I suppose, what VB and the Bow guys do. I think this is a good path forward. That space. Yeah.
I'm gonna.
They also use Ansible as well in a similar sort of way. It's just an alternative to Terraform. And I was looking at that a little bit last year, but then sort of got stuck on other things. Using Ansible to update the admins for firewalls, because I don't know if everybody knows, but you've got to add it. If someone joins or leaves, you have to add an every template, which can take a while. And there was one more thing. Oh yeah, you asked about patching on the routers and switches, I think.
All right, we're still, there's Louis.
Come on now.
Morning, gents from Queensland. Jason Maskell-Drew here. How are you?
All right, Louis, can you hear us?
Hello.
Hello? Is that you, Louis?
I remember this.
Yep, it's Louis here.
Thanks, Louis. Let's get started then. I will just do a quick housekeeping. Thanks everybody for joining this call. It's been quite a big response, and we've got quite a number of people. I make sure that we've got mobile phones turned off on my side as well. And just as an introduction, my name is Leo Guggle. I'm the chairperson of the Growing Data Foundation, and I also work with LoRaWAN as part of my day job, focusing sort of on AgTech and regions. And since I'm one of the people that's sort of extremely concerned by this frequency change, we sort of made sure that we have this community call today, where we can actually get some of the information from the team in the US. Just sort of housekeeping wise, I'm posting the agenda into the chat now.
Recognize the face, but not the name.
Can you guys make sure, since there's quite a number of people on the call, that everybody's got their microphones muted when they're not talking? Just use the chat for questions, and Frank has been kindly offering to make sure that he fields the questions, and if they can be answered, we'll endeavor to have them answered today. If not, we will get back to them. The meeting is being recorded for the benefit of the rest of the community, so we will share the meeting recording afterwards. And yeah, let's just keep it civil and professional, please. I mean, I know that there's a lot of angst in the community about this change, and it's probably safe to say that the Helium community has been very shocked by the effective downgrading of 4,500 gateways that's sort of pending at the moment. But what we're here to hear from Lois is firstly about HIP-45, then about this move. I've also copied the underlying GitHub pull request that we're talking about today. So over to you, Lois.
All right, thanks, Leo. And good morning, everyone. So
I thought that, I reckon it was the first one.
Toby, would you mind muting yourself, please?
They made a huge deal out of.
Is there a moderator that can mute him?
Yeah, let me just.
You know, had a stroke and then came back, and it should be like a
Mute.
fourth Olympics or something like that.
Yeah, I have muted.
Great. Cool, thank you. Anyway, yeah, so I guess I wanted to kick it off by talking about HIP-45 and explaining what it is and why it's important as like a background before we really dive into the details of the proposal of switching frequency plan for Australia and New Zealand. So HIP-45 was almost literally created to arbitrate this kind of disagreement where we basically have some people that want to change the frequency plan for a region for various reasons, but maybe it's not what everybody wants, and how do you arbitrate doing that fairly? And this was something that during the first LoRaWAN committee or working group meeting with DY, we thought about trying to proceed to do, but there's an immediate reaction from your community, who is saying like, well, this isn't what we want, and it became very clear that we needed to create a process that basically gave time for review, discussion, and a final say that comes from the community and the operators in Australia. So that's why HIP-45 was designed that way. There's a couple of like assumptions. The first assumption to it is we don't want to fragment the frequency plan. So one proposal that's worth just knowing as far as background of why HIP-45 is the way it is, we didn't want to, we thought about saying, let's let operators choose whether they want to do AS9231 or AU915, because that would be the most bottom-up way of doing it, really, of saying do whatever you want. But from a usability perspective, we realized that would create a lot of fragmentation and end up basically mitigating the power of the Helium network as this big open public network that people can use. If they start wondering like, oh, okay, well, in this region of Australia, there's AS923 that's really well covered, but over there it's AU915, and maybe it's just a confusing thing to use. So the first assumption that from that reasoning that came out was, all right, let's make sure that the frequency plan is unified, at least for now, so that the network is as usable as possible. Then the next step was kind of thinking about what a fair process is for the community to finally decide what they want. So it's the design of the HIP-45 is basically like the DUI's LoRaWAN Committee makes a recommendation or a choice to switch a frequency plan and publishes it as we did last night, basically. This starts this 4-week window where like this is day 1 of 4 weeks, where we can talk about it and figure out what people want, what are all the arguments. You know, the committee made its arguments, and maybe you might disagree with them, and that's fine. But that's the perspective of the committee. This 4 weeks is about getting that perspective poked at, questioned, counter-argued against for 4 weeks. And then we would hold another call like this, hopefully include more. This was a little short notice for me to pull in some of the committee members, but hopefully next time, well, at the end of these 4 weeks, it'd be nice to do this same kind of call, but bring in a lot more, or at least a few of the committee members to kind of have a more, a dialogue to hopefully settle during a call like that, the arguments for and against after having thought about it for 4 weeks, basically. If things aren't settled after that event if things aren't settled after that call or that, the town hall like this, we would proceed to an on-chain vote where every single hotspot in Australia and New Zealand, who are the concerned regions by this change, would have one vote for or against the change. And essentially, oh, that's assuming that no one's, neither side is withdrawn, that there's still people protesting the change, that the committee still wants to push the change forward. It just gets settled by this vote. So yeah, that's the summary of that process. And yeah, so in my mind, it accomplished like two main things. One is allowing a relatively small technical committee to make recommendations so that we can kind of move fast, because Australia is definitely the most interesting frequency plan discussion that I've come across. There's a lot of other ones that are a lot simpler. And so it makes sense to have a small group that kind of works through these quickly. And the people in the committee basically have like a decade of LoRaWAN experience, working across the world. They're from some of the biggest LoRaWAN companies out there. So they have a pretty good technical background, but obviously they aren't the operators and they aren't the people in each region that actually are providing the network. So that's why they make the recommendation, but the final say really comes from that vote. And so that was kind of the balance that I think we struck with HIP-45. And there wasn't much, as I think it was published around October, and it was pending for about three or 4 months. And there wasn't much pushback on that process. So I think that generally there's been agreement that seems like a fair way to do things. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that process is clear. And that, yeah, so I guess I'll cut it off there. And we can stop for a second and do questions on and talk about HIP-45 maybe, or if Leo, if you want to add anything in as well. Before we kind of move on, I'm happy to take a break.
Just after some clarification on that voting process, is that one vote per hotspot or wallet, or is that a HNT weighted vote?
It would be hotspot per wallet.
Would HNT come into the equation on that, or is that one vote per one hotspot?
One vote
Or
per
one
hotspot.
vote
With
per one.
HNT is not at all involved in this kind of vote.
Okay, good.
It was, yeah, the specific design of the vote was to say that the operators are really the one in control here.
Thank you.
Look, from my side, I don't think there is a great deal of questions right now, other than the one that Chris just asked. My question would be, what is the reason to dump Australia and New Zealand into one vote? I mean, these countries, they are actually different countries. They have different regulatory regimes, different size, different topology. So why is the vote, or why is this not one country, one vote?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the HIP perhaps could have clarified the agency to do this type of thing, but basically, I think specifically for the reasoning behind this change, it's very, a lot of the reasoning has to do with standardizing with other countries in the region and making it so that like if there's a map in the HIP that kind of shows the neighboring countries that are using AS9231, and that is at least part of the reasoning, is homogenizing with some of the neighboring countries. So in this specific case, and in general, I would say like this has come across like it. Let's back out from Australia for a second. It's whenever there's any kind of like, oh, well, what are we going to do for this region? They have some kind of conflicting frequency plan to choose from here. One of the first things we try to figure out is like, what are the neighboring countries around them using, so that we can homogenize things, because you generally, if Europe was alternating between AS923, EU868, and US915 and whatnot, like that wouldn't be a very good experience for users of the network. So generally, that's one of the first things we try to do. I think it's something that could have been clarified better in HIP-45, but I think generally aligning regions and voting on multiple, like voting on a block of countries at a time, drives towards that goal of increasing the usability of the network by homogenization.
Shouldn't that then include countries like Papua New Guinea? I mean, I posted a list yesterday in GitHub. There's actually quite a substantial list. I mean, the image that was shown on the GitHub pull request really just shows Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea. There is actually a substantial list of AU 915 countries that helium supports at the moment. Are we going to do that across the board? Why pick on Australia and New Zealand? I mean, that's the bit that seems a bit strange to me.
Yeah. So I would say that the other country, I think Papua New Guinea was an omission. It should have been included in that. I think, but then the other countries are mostly South American, and so the regional argument doesn't really carry over to that, I would say. And I would like to like no one's picking on Australia here. It's really like the you can look at the minutes, you can watch the video from the meeting of DY, and it's not like, yeah, let's really mess with those guys over there. Come on, it'll be funny. It's really the reasoning behind it is between, well, we can dive into that in a second, but it's a question. It's I think it's fair to say that there's at least a few good arguments on both sides. You can be very convinced of one side or another, but I don't think we need to start saying that people are picking on anyone. It's just a difference of opinion, I'd say. And just to be clear, I also don't, I personally don't even have an opinion on this. I've leaned both ways, like every other week for the last 4 months. I'm really here as kind of hopefully a messenger of that committee I'm not even a voting member of. I formalized it and set it up and help organize it, but I didn't vote on this, and and actually at the end of the day, I don't have a strong opinion one way or another on this either. I'm just trying to make the process of HIP-45 and be as visible as possible, as well as explain and hopefully bridge the time zones between different people here, because a lot of the committee is based in Europe, and this kind of time slot's kind of difficult for them, for example.
Jason has some questions, Leo.
Yeah, what I was thinking, we definitely will come to that. If we can finish off the HIP-45 conversation, I don't think a lot of people have any issue with the HIP-45 process. The issue really is the frequency change that's been suggested. So maybe let's get Lois to go over the second topic, and then we're opening up for questions, because I'm probably thinking that the questions will be around the frequency change. So Lois, would you be okay to go on with the second topic?
Yeah, let me pull that up. I don't have the so yeah, I guess as I pull it up, I'll kind of explain some details that might be interesting generally for understanding how helium works. So one of the
anything about the change in frequency on helium network. Oh, okay.
One of the explanations, or one of the rules of HIP-45 is that
Australia,
when the
US run it, like helium people are running it, but it's for the Australian market.
There's some back. I'm having trouble talking over it. I think it's Adrian Hatwell or something. Anyway, part of the rules of HIP-45 are essentially once the committee decides that like they think switching a frequency plan is a good idea, they'd open a PR to some nebulous repo. What's really firmed up in the last few months with some of the different POC changes is there's now a repository called HPlans, which I'll put the link in here. And that defines the frequency plan for every region. And let's think about this. So these GeoJSON files, they're really nice. Actually, I like them because you click on them and they render the frequency plan coverage. Anyway, that literally is what gets written into the blockchain as a chain var, and all the miners like sync that to understand, based on the location assertion of a hotspot, what region is that hotspot in. So this is a pretty interesting repository because it basically defines programmatically how what frequency plans the hotspots are going to operate on. So I did this pull request last night summarizing the arguments of the committee as best as I could. There's the link to that. And so I'll kind of just run through the arguments quickly. I think I don't know if I'm the best one to explain them because I really just tried to summarize them the best I understood them, but I'll kind of run through them anyway. So one of the biggest reasons is one of the biggest reasons is that these four public operators, NNCO, Spark, and Ventia, are all using AS9231, and they are all operators that people could roam with potentially. And so it was an idea of aligning frequency plan with them. The only large operator, as far as was discussed during the meeting, was that was brought up was TTN using AU915. So that was one argument for. Another one is the regional argument that we kind of touched on earlier. If you look at, actually, I might be doing a screen share just for this one moment. There it is. I can't do it. It's fine. Anyway, if you look at the link that I dropped in the messages, you'll see that there's quite a few neighbors that are using AS9231. What else do we have going here? There's a few utilities and potential users of the network using AS9231, according to the committee. Sydney Water and Urban Utilities was brought up. Another kind of RF-based argument is that the downlink coverage on AS9231 uses 125 kilohertz instead of 500 kilohertz. And so thanks to that, you get better sensitivity and range with this if you have the same kind of output power. The next is that the AS9231 is a dynamic channel plan. And actually, that's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about because I'm a US 915 user personally here, and I've always thought the differences between the dynamic and fixed frequency plans are pretty interesting. But one of the nice things about the dynamic plans is that it's fairly easy to kind of hop around the 5 or 6 optional channels. I forget whether IS9231 either has 2 or 3 join channels that are fixed, but then the other 5 are more or less dynamically defined, which can be nice because it's easy to offload devices without. Basically, you can have like anyway, I'll stop there with my musing on that one. What else do we have here? The join procedure on these dynamic channel plans ends up being less painful, and something I also know about with my US 915 device. The Helium network only operates on 8 channels, so you have to fall on the right channel. There's ways to mitigate that, and plenty of stacks and devices have ways to mitigate that problem. But that is something that's pained me in the past, and that's one of the things I do like about the dynamic channel plans. As far as reasons for not switching to AS9231, one is kind of like a counter argument to some of the, so there's these utilities and other operators using AS9231, so that's good for roaming back and forth with those people. But one of the downsides is that we're sharing spectrum with them then. So being isolated on AS9231 does have the fact that being isolated on AU15, AU915 gives you some free spectrum basically to use. And then another concept that was discussed that I thought was pretty interesting was the idea that choosing a specific AU915 band could make it possible or easier for example, an AS9231 device that is roaming in AU915 coverage to find the AU915 coverage and join. So that was potentially a less a way to kind of like mitigate the AS923 AU15 friction without switching to AS9231, but making it easier for an AS9231 device to find an AU915 network, basically. So yeah, that's the summary of what's written there. I know there's been a lot of there's some noise right now, but anyway, yeah. So those were the arguments discussed by just the committee. Again, part of this 4-week.
It was hanging, and the reboot is what saved you.
Part of this 4-week process is to get all the counter arguments from
guys,
people who have other perspectives and everything, and that's and we're getting plenty of that. So anyway, I'll leave it there.
Frank, are there any questions currently?
So I've captured a few of the questions. One of the questions that came up is, who's the main advocate for AS923? Who's promoting it?
So the committee vote was 3-2. Trying to remember specifically who the votes were. I think there was Olivier from Semtech, Alper from Actility, and the third vote, I'm having trouble recollecting whether it was I feel like I remember that David and so it must have been our friend from Curlink, and his name is escaping me right now. Hold on. Yannick from Curlink was the third vote. And then no one voted against it, but David from Senate and the other David from Tectelic voted abstained.
Another question that came up is this the first instance where frequency change is being proposed by a country or a group of countries?
I think we've done some housekeeping in things that were just blatant mistakes, basically. And other than that, we have like at least, Michael might know off the top of his head. I think we have like 4 or 5 changes that are under consideration right now. Off the top of my head, I know Malaysia is one of them because we're AS9231. Some of the channels we're using are potentially out of legal range. Another one is let's see. Well, I can't recall all of them right now, but I know we have about 4 or 5 that are being studied at the moment. But there wasn't enough resolution yet to vote on them yet.
Okay, thank you.
Malaysia is one of those countries highlighted in the unification of the Southeast Asia region. Does that affect the unification of the areas?
Potentially. That being said, one of the things we're considering, for example, is that what's nice about, or basically some, just to recap again about like how the dynamic frequency plans and how AS9231 in particular works. And again, Michael, if you can correct me here, I think there's 2 or 3 join channels, and then 5 that are dynamically configured. And so the 3 join channels of AS9231 are fixed, and those are legal in Malaysia. And then the way it's like configured is those 3, I forget all the precise numbers, but those 3 are kind of like at the bottom range, and these next 5 are appended right there, evenly spaced. But those top couple ones are kind of out of range. So you could pretty easily be AS9231 compliant and just shift those onto the bottom, for example, to kind of make it an even stream. But so it would be AS9231 technically, but it would be a different range of dynamic channels, essentially. So that might be how we resolve Malaysia to maintain consistency there with some of the neighboring countries.
Yeah, that mostly describes the situation. I mean, we're still in early discussions on that, but that sums it up.
Lewis, you were saying that the joint channels don't move. with 9231 and 9232, the two joy channels are the same and they overlap. But when you use the frequency offset concept of actually shifting the 6 channels down, the two join channels move with it. So you end up with, you know, a 923X, you know, a 923Y, etc. You know, maybe down to FS1, FS2. They're all independent systems. So there is no common join channel with them. And the other problem is if it did, you know, if the regional parameters was reconfigured to lock them in, you've got one of the transmit channels from gateways on smack on those two join channels. So you're going to get a lot of co-channel interference, and which will seriously limit the capacity of the 923 system.
The proposal is to use AS923-1. So AS923-1 is the oldest plan in existence. The newer variants were all proposed because of legal issues. So there's not very many countries at all that are using 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah, yeah. So in 9231, the two join channels are channel 7 and 8 in the band plan. They're the top two channels, and they happen to be smack on the first transmit channel for a gateway in 915. So I suppose the important thing for people here is to understand in the US 915 system, the 64 gateway receive channels are in one block of frequencies, and the 8 transmit downlink channels are further up the band and they don't overlap. Now in Australia, we didn't have the luxury of that bandwidth being available. So the top 8, the top end of the receive system is overlapped with the transmit channels from the gateways. So if you were running in the top, say 16 channels of a 915 system, you will be getting serious interference from the gateways transmitting. So typically what you do is you get the 915s down the bottom end of the band and you let the transmitters sit up there, the gateways transmit at the top end. Well, 923 smack on the TX of channel 1 of a gateway. It overlaps.
So I believe, Tony, this is basically an argument to never adopt subband 5 under AU 915?
No, so the gateways transmit in 8 channels. So if you take FS2, which is like what TTN is, or my own systems are in the same bands, I've got eight channels in there. So if the gateway receives a node on the first of 8 channels, it will transmit on over the top of 923. If it receives on channel 2 of the block of 8, it'll transmit slightly higher up the band. So there's this one-to-one relationship between the receive channel on a gateway and the channel will answer back on. So the nodes know where to go listening. The problem is 1 in 8 transmissions from a gateway are smack on the 923 system. And the problem with 923 is it transmits and receives on the same channel. It's a simplex system. So for my take is Helium as a company is going to seriously limit its network capacity. Now,
that really begs the question for me is why wasn't there anybody in the region? We have a lot of RF experts here, and Tony is obviously one of those. Why wasn't a person in the region consulted in this committee when it is about the region?
Yeah, and this stuff's not new. I mean, in the US, you have the cellular networks where they've got mixed systems. You've got amps, you had CDMA, CDMA1, CDMA systems, and that same issue came up. How do these systems interwork? Now, actually, I did the analysis for Bell Labs on that back in the late 90s. So this is not a new RF concept, and so there's plenty of people around who know how to analyse this stuff. And so I'd suggest we actually have a look at this in some detail. I think we've got to drill in a bit more detail than those items on the GitHub page. There's more to it than that. And one of the ones I'd suggest you look at is 923 is 14 dB lower than 915. Now you've got a 20-degree fade margin on LoRa, so you're only 6 dB off the thing not working, and it won't take much for that to fail. Because 915, AU 915 can transmit at 30 dBm, whereas 923, unless you're going to start making special nodes, and I take it people like Sydney Water are talking about using 923 because they want to use off-the-shelf, LoRa water meters.
Yeah, Tony. This is Jay here. By default, the LoRa Alliance actually recommends that nodes be shipped at 16 dBm. That's their default setting, and so unless anyone's messing around with the nodes, that's what they're going to be transmitting on.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to clarify on that, it's that's their default join power. After they join, then the respective network within that country, for example, in Australia, tells the device through a downlink that you can transmit up to a maximum of 30 dBm. So that's just a default join, but after the join, the network advises the device of what it can do.
So in regional Australia, how is this device going to jump? We're talking about regions here. Australia is a very big country. I'm not sure if people in the US have actually looked on the map. A lot of our use cases are in the region. So this transmit power and the join procedure does take a lot of power. How are these devices are going to go through the procedure when we're talking about really big distances in Australian regions?
Can I just interject there about this whole Sydney Water thing, please? I'd like you to either prove it or leave it alone, because we're designing for Sydney Water a biosolids treatment facility plant. We have an MOU with Helium. You knew we was designing this biosolid treatment plant to provide the waste to energy and provide power using the Helium network, that people can actually offset their power costs. And the design that we've got specifies 915. The same as also there was a tender that closed yesterday that specifies 915 for the smart farms and ag farms within Australia. So you guys, or the DY team, knew that there was Australian companies that had MOUs in place that were trying to do waste to energy facilities, trying to do the IoT smart meters, trying to do the ag farms, trying to bring it all under the same roof. And then at that point, no Australian company that holds an MOU with Helium was invited to sit on that council.
And just to reiterate, there's a lot of local government, state government in South Australia that are looking at mandating AU 915. There's a lot of tenders that have been out and will come out mandating AU 915 because it's the official ACMA regional frequency plan. So the Helium network would then be locked out of all of those tenders. I mean, it just makes no sense.
So yeah, if I'd like to just step in for 1 second, I'd like to I understand there's a point that has been made a couple times, which is why is no one from Australia in the DY LoRaWAN committee meeting when it's being discussed on Australia? One of the reasons that is because the process of HIP-45 essentially gives that power to Australia to decide in the end. And this is actually this is the moment where, the committee had their analysis. You disagree with that analysis. It seems like amongst you have a lot of very knowledgeable people about the RF characteristics, the business environment, the government's environment, and this 4-week window is for those points to come forth. If every single time the DY LoRaWAN committee was discussing a region change, we had to organize and orchestrate with people in that region to do a synchronized meeting before we even start discussing the region, we wouldn't be able to process the amount of frequency plans that are being discussed. So that's just one bit of context I want to let you express is these meetings are already hard enough to coordinate because we have People are spread across the world phoning in for them already, and it's only 5. And you know, the point of it is HIP-45 makes it impossible for you to be railroaded on this. You basically get to decide in the end, because they can make recommendations, but ultimately it comes down to the vote. And if anything, if you make persuasive enough arguments, the whole thing might get dropped before the vote even happens. So I just want to make that clear. There's a lot of, you know, points being made about like about the committee kind of doing whatever they want, but the HIP-45 literally designed to take away power from the committee and making it so that you guys decide what you want in the end.
This is not really about a inclusive process. It's like just having somebody from the region on board. I mean, we could save ourselves a whole lot of angst. There's a lot of wasted time. The community, I think, Chris, you ran a poll in the AU Discord. Maybe you can have a chat about this. But why waste your time when you know that the whole helium community in the country is dead against this?
I've heard both sides of it. It's not like there's a clear leaning in today's call.
See, we haven't heard any of the other side. I mean, the video recording was the first time, and that was 3 months after the actual meeting, that I knew of that vote taking place and who was on. And from all I can ascertain from this meeting, it was basically activity providing the document that has not been shared with anybody and driving the process. So there was no Australian involvement in that at all. And there was not a wide-ranging consultation as far as I can see.
And it's the framing of the argument. AU 915 is almost on the ropes and has to prove its worth. Either that or it's pitched as 2 equals, but that's just not the case. AU 915 is the default for the country. And it's also the existing one that all these contracts depend on.
So I guess what I'm curious is, you know, when I discussed HIP-45 earlier, it seemed like that general process was acceptable to folks, but now that we're talking about this particular situation, that process is unacceptable. So
No, that's not what I mean. It's really what I would have said is that this could have been prevented. This wouldn't have had to occur. Now we have to go through this lengthy process and wait for a vote. Meanwhile, what nobody is talking about, there's a lot of individuals and companies rolling out devices on AU 915 as we speak. That hasn't even been mentioned in the PR. So a lot of the advantages of the TX power issue has not been mentioned in the PR. The PR is completely one-sided. Why was there not earlier consultation? So we now have to go through all of these angst of having 4,500 gateways potentially switching over to an inferior plan.
I guess, Lou, there's an important part to this also, as you're saying there's a 4-week period to provide feedback before there's a vote. And it would be really important to capture all of these, both technical and project impact type aspects to the frequency change, so that if something like that was discussed in future, it wouldn't go through this process again. So, and there are some questions that have arisen about, okay, well, how do we efficiently provide that feedback so that that can go back to the committee?
Just to clarify one thing, at the end of the 4 weeks, the vote is not automatic. Like what I anticipate, what is actually mandated in the HIP is we will basically have a meeting like this. We will have more of the committee members present at that time, and after hearing the feedback, the written feedback to the PR, after having had this face-to-face or virtual face-to-face, if the committee still maintains their position that they would recommend the change, only then would it go to the vote. And so anyway, that's the process. I guess something I'm trying to understand though is So it's almost like what I'm almost hearing is you wouldn't want the committee to be able to vote on any country without the country's input, right? But then I'm trying to balance, well, and I think that's kind of what I'm basically hearing is you almost feel offended that the committee was able to vote about a frequency plan change without having community input on that. And I would say that is if that is the case, then the HIP-45 process is not satisfactory. And what you're looking for is an amendment to that. What I'm trying to get across otherwise though is it's not baked into how it is right now, because there's a lot of frequency plan changes that need to happen and are not contentious. And so how does the committee have the agency to do that? If every single time there's like, and I don't know how you gauge whether the community is okay with them even talking or voting on something, right? So I'm very interested and open to hearing improvements on that process, because it does sound like, based on what I'm hearing today, there's frustration with the fact that there was even a suggestion to change frequency plan for Australia. And like, anyway, I hope I got that across. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess, Lewis, from my perspective, it's that the industry side of things that's wanting the change to AS923 seemed to be well represented on the DY panel, whereas the other side wasn't. So if there was no side, if it was just a change coming up and we're going to put this to HIP-45 or whatever, that's one thing. But it seems like there was actually a representation by one side at the time, and that it either shouldn't happen at all, or if it does happen, there should be both sides there.
And to be fairly clear, and that was even mentioned a number of times in the actual meeting recording, DY knew very well that this was very contentious. They had already voted once, and the vote was reversed because they knew the community was against it. So it was very well known that this was a contentious issue. Why not include the community in the process? If there's no contention, then yeah, it's a great process. But everybody knew that this was not a smooth process. There is no love for AS923 in Australia.
I mean, again, it's just it's a governance problem for me. Like, my biggest interest, again, to recap, kind of like, I don't have a position on AS923 or AU915. What I am more focused on is creating a scalable process for DY and for the helium network. And so I can't create a process that's case by case and by saying like, well, the air doesn't feel very good right now, so I think we're gonna need to do this one a little differently. What we're trying to set up is something that's systematic and fair from a governance perspective. So I'd be interested in understanding like how we could change the process so that it doesn't create this level of frustration in a way that's systematic and fair, basically. Yeah.
Lewis, just a question then. Within the current HIP system and consultation system, I think you said you got 30-day open window for community consultation. So what happens in this case where you started that process and on day one there's a whole series of other issues raised that weren't in the original discussion paper? Does the process allow you to say we need to put a freeze on it, or we need to go back and take in more input and then redefine the discussion paper?
There's nothing formally defined there, but I think I hope that the committee members will review today's video, for example, and we will likely have a meeting in the next 4 weeks. And for all we know, after today's feedback, they might withdraw the recommendation. And the HIP doesn't outline that specifically, but I think it would be well within the spirit of the HIP to say like, okay, like just to like recap, the idea of the HIP was after 4 weeks, if there's a formal dissent, which I highly anticipate there will be, then there will be a meeting like this. If there's no resolution, then there's a vote, right? And I think that it would be well within the spirit of the HIP for the committee to withdraw their position at any point if the arguments are persuasive enough, basically, or if they think it's creating too much. Because one of the things too I want to emphasize is other than governance and making this be a fair outcome, my biggest motivation has been to also have this resolved quickly, as quickly as is reasonable, because I understand that there's a lot of just the unknown factor of what's the frequency plan going to be is almost one of the worst things that can happen. So I wanted to create something that resolved the question, got to the end of it, made everybody have made it fair and as quick as possible, while leaving a 4-week window for feedback and discussion. But anyway, that's just to get back to what, that pulling back is, I think, within the spirit of the HIP, and I hope that if when Leo shares the recording of this, I hope to share it back with the committee, and I hope they'll have an understanding of where everyone's coming from, and they'll either kind of want to have an opportunity to expand their arguments further and kind of make their points more clear than is currently written up, because maybe that's a shortcoming of mine as well, because I just basically wrote the pull request based on my understanding of the arguments, and maybe there's shortcomings there as well. But yeah.
So one thing I'd recommend you do when you, as you say, pass it back to the committee, is that the community here in Australia had a similar number of Zoom meetings and discussions around 923, and that must have been 6 months ago, 12 months ago, something like that. And we then put a proposal to TTN about how they could handle it. But I think the interesting thing for helium that you could pick up out of that, what the community did, was they had a recommendation about how to onboard existing systems that are running on 923. Instead of alienating them, we came up with a proposal on how to bring them in, and then over time they would migrate. Not forced, but anyway, there was a proposal in that whole package of how to handle existing as well as future systems.
Yeah, I think that'd be very interesting to send over if you could, Tony.
Frank, have we got any questions that are up for?
I think they've broadly been covered. There are obviously quite a few technical questions there that are around the feedback. There's a kind of a question that's arising around where the conversation should be taking place around GitHub and Discord, which is, I think, probably more for us than for Louis.
There's also a question in regards to a poll. Chris, are you there? Do you want to? I think it was Chris that put a poll in the Australian Discord. Do you want to have a quick talk about that?
Yeah, so we posted a quick poll last night with some information regarding the changes. We also cross-posted that to at least one Facebook group. I just checked, and there's been around about 100 responses in favour of staying with AU 915 just in the last 12 to 14 hours.
It would help for commercial planning if there was a date by which it would be decided.
Well, yeah, as far as that goes, I think the worst case scenario at this point would probably be basically 4 weeks from today, and then we would, I think, try to have a meeting like this as fast as possible. And then have the vote happen. So I think it's reasonable, like if everything can be on pace by April 8th, let's say, would probably be the worst case scenario. Or no, sorry, it's not a worst case scenario, but you know, if it gets to the very end and if we keep the pace of things and organize the calls and get the vote done within a week, or let's say, and stuff like that, I think we could see it be done by April 8th. But there's definitely some unknowns on timing of a call and timing of a vote. And perhaps it gets resolved faster by one side withdrawing the recommendation, or one side being okay with going forward.
And can we assume that every helium hotspot shift will just switch?
Yeah, there's some pieces to that I think are worth discussing. So I'll start with the software piece of it because that's easier, and then I'll go into the hardware piece of it because that's harder. So software, the frequency plan, as I mentioned, is defined in that H plan repository that I linked earlier in the Zoom meeting. And so that ends up getting written to the blockchain. And so every miner can read that and say, well, I'm asserted in Australia, I need to use AS9231, or I need to use AU915. So that's how that happens. If a change were to happen, that repo would get actually updated, a change bar would be written, and it would be deployed that way. But the timing of that would be based first on talking to every menu. Like we'd look at every HIP-19 approved vendor that's been distributing in Australia and make sure that they have their packet forwarder connected in a way that knows how to adapt that. I know, like, we've worked with some vendors to help them make that happen, but I don't know if every single vendor has that well greased already. So there's that, you know, that's actually, we're getting from software now more like, or blockchain software to the firmware piece of it is like, how do you tell the packet forwarder what to do? If they have a good dynamic system, it'll read from the miner or the light gateway client, figure out what region it's in, change the frequency plan of the packet forwarder based on that. That's kind of in the ideal situation.
That assumes the firmware has been updated. I mean, at the moment, I know, for example, on our gateways, the radio is not going. The Docker container for the miner, of course, will update, but so that's actually a point worth noting. I don't think that will be a smooth change. There will be a lot of equipment out there that has not got the ability to force firmware changes. I mean, if you run a really large fleet of gateways, you really do not want that. So and if you run a large fleet of AU915 devices and you want to stay on because you're not going to switch. So what we're talking about here is not a nice switch between one frequency to another, is actually the choice between having one single frequency plan at the moment and a cluster of problems. I mean, we've been through this with TTS. I mean, we have had some background in this. So this is not going to be a smooth change.
I never said it was going to be smooth. I just was explaining how it would theoretically work.
Theory is nice. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Lewis? Just with that, the frequency plan, would AS923 be a blanket transmit power for everyone that uses that frequency, or would the frequency power be different for the regions? Because some regions, like in Asia, only allow a certain amount of transmit power, and Australia allows up to 30 dBm. So is that something controlled by the frequency plan, or how's that, or is it just going to be blanket, everyone's at the lowest?
Yeah, it's a great question. So from a proof of coverage standpoint, currently the stance is it'll be at the lowest, or what's most universal and works in every country. However, something that that's worth knowing about is basically there's nothing that limits like people who operate consoles or LNSs or OUIs. A lot of, I'm going to cover all the possible words, but people who buy packets and and act as the LNS for the LoRaWAN devices on the Helium network, they're not really limited in what they're doing, other than what is configured then in the firmware of the gateway. So they can, if they realize that they're using a gateway in Australia, the LNS can amp up the transmit power to anything that the gateway will accept. And at that point, it becomes a question of the gateway firmware, which vendor you bought it from, and how they have things configured. So
yeah, but however, for proof of coverage, it will be at the lowest level, because I think that will be something that the community would also be quite interested in.
Michael might know more about this. I don't know if he's been tracking this at all. I know it's been a topic, and I think up until now, we've been leaning the way that like we're only going to have a single transmit power. Do you know anything additional about this, Michael, or maybe not? For proof of
not
coverage.
At the moment. Yeah, we've been we have been discussing customizing the transmit power. So it's under discussion.
So would that actually mean an AS9234 variant for Australia then?
No, it's still compliant with the AS9231.
Okay.
There's a fair amount of leeway in the frequency plans. But I mean, just to be fair, generally the hardware, like both on the device and on the gateway side, the vendors will limit it to what is portable in the frequency plan, and it would take some a little bit of regional.
Sorry.
No, yeah, it would take a little. It would take a special touch, let's say, to get to eke out the maximum of an AS9231 device, because you're like telling it it's in Australia, and you might have access to the stack, or you might have access to the gateway firmware close enough that you can up its limits.
So realistically, not going to happen.
It all depends on your infrastructure, I'd say, but yeah.
Lewis, just a question. I'm not a technical person. I'm coming from a business perspective, but and without going through all of the pros and cons, it appears to me like there is no technical argument to do this, and I won't go into the pros and cons, but and there's a question about advocacy. Where is this request coming from? I don't want you to go into all the 10 reasons, but how's the process go where someone raises this and driven it to the committee to then vote on? Who's driving this? Because everyone on this page that I can see is so dead against this for both business and technical reasons. So I'm trying to understand where the driver has originally come from. And I don't want to go and regurgitate 10 minutes of discussion, but where's it coming from?
So we've had, I mean, first of all, the people that voted for it on the committee obviously think it's a good idea. And so you could look towards that. But there's a fair amount. I've talked to at least 2 or 3 companies in Australia that want to use AS9231. I've done that personally myself. I don't know like what the NDA and disclosure status is and stuff like that. So I can't name things, but I know I've talked to businesses and fairly large entities in Australia that want to use A931, and they prefer to use A9231. So
sorry, Lewis, but that's obviously really unfair, because I understand there may be NDAs, but we don't know who you've spoken to, who the large companies are, and what
if I had
for that, you know what I mean?
And if I had a strong opinion, I'd like, I'd gather the data and put it all together for you. But I think at this point I think it's, I would put the ball in the committee's court to drum up. So one of the things that I think the DY's LoRaWAN committee could try to do, for example, to try to be more persuasive, is lay out kind of a fact sheet of the entities and numbers that we're talking about. Because as hotspot operators, I think one would always prefer to have more traffic going through their gateway than not. So if there's some compelling numbers there,
Lewis,
then maybe that would be interesting. So that's one thing I would would, I can't, yeah. So I'm not
Lewis.
going to make that argument. And I can't disclose necessarily who I've talked to and whatever, but I think that would make it more interesting, I think, specifically from the point that they're coming from.
Okay, Lewis, I'm not going to ask you to disclose who you've been talking to, but I'm going to tell you some facts which are on our MOU that you have. Our facts are this: we have 500,000 hotspots ready for deploy in Australia with our sensors that we've already gone in and put a lot of money into. The 525,000 that we are actually looking at doing clean power with McKenna and others on the helium team, I can tell you now, this change will force us to pull all of those units instantly. Done. We will walk away from it. And that's 525,000 units. So if the DY team wishes to look at that and look at our MOU that we have with you, then that's fine. But my view is this: it is not welcomed here. It is not wanted here. It is not warranted here. And whichever companies you are currently talking to, no offense when I say this, but they need to come to the table, come to this party here and say, well, this is the reason we want to use 923. This is the reason we want to take it away from it. And I think that would be a fair option for everybody to actually then understand what you're doing with these frequency changes. If anybody else disagrees with what I'm saying there, then please be honest about it. But I think transparency about who you're talking to, because this now has turned into Helium's talking to corporate people behind the scenes that are actually pushing this forward. That's how it feels to me.
And the documents that are relied upon in the committee. I mean, the meeting notes for that December meetings are shocking to me. I mean, really, it's a 3 paragraphs and a couple of bullet points. It does not even come close to a transcript of what actually happened in the meeting. I mean, Dave Kiendo from CNET has actually cautioned a couple of those arguments in the meeting. There's no mentioning of that in the PR. The documents that were constantly talked about in the committee meeting were not released. Why is it this secrecy? There's a meeting recording that's been lost, others that haven't been shared for 3 months. It's just the communications in this process have been really odd.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to all of those points, Leo, because I think they're generally pretty unfair, given that, complaining about the minutes of a video that's publicly accessible is, I think, kind of trying to say there's a fire where there's nothing. Like, you can watch the video to see what was said.
If the PR would have reflected that, but the PR just reflected the meeting notes, which really did not cover a lot of what was actually said. And you know as well as I do, most people will not sit through this recording. I have unfortunately wasted a fair bit of time going over it multiple times, but most people would not have the time to do that, and that's why these transcripts are really important.
And I'm the transcriber, and I just, I did what I did so that people could find the parts of the meeting that were interesting to them, and I summarized what I could. But I'm not a good transcriber at all. And it's, would you rather me wait 3 months for DY to hire someone that's good at transcribing so we can drag this out for another 3 months? So a lot of, I think, you being upset about us hiding things or being, being sketchy or whatever you're alluding to right now, really has to do with the fact of like us trying, first of all, one of my objectives, trying to get this resolved quickly. Would you rather drag this out? And the fact that the like everybody at Helium and DY, which by the way are separate entities, and there's a lot of separation there happening. But like with the growth of the network, we're trying to tackle about 1 million things ahead. So I will 100% tell you, I'm a bad transcriber, and I don't have time to, I can't spend a whole day learning how to be a better transcriber. I can, however, spend 3 hours of one of my mornings transcribing it and noting it, and then writing up the actually that doesn't even count the PR, but just the transcription took me about 3 to 4 hours. And it makes it hopefully more accessible to you, but I'd rather it be released with some crappy transcription faster than to drag this out any longer.
Look, there's no criticism. I definitely don't want to shoot the messenger here. But what I'm trying to point out, if the process would have been fair, none of these things would have been an issue. It's been a very one-sided process. So that's why these questions do come up.
And I'm interested to hear what improvements are wanted from the process, because HIP-45 does describe some very discrete steps. I've heard some unhappiness with the way it is. I'd like to hear a concrete suggestion of how to improve it, while also hearing, my main point of the reason why it frustrates, the reason why it is not listening for community input before the committee votes on a thing is because the committee has like 6 different frequency plans to talk about. So if there's a way for them to process that many frequency plan changes without creating the kind of friction that's been created today, I'd really like to hear what suggestions there are there.
Where would you suggest that these suggestions are put into the HIP-45 GitHub, or what would be the best process? I mean, I do not want to shoot down a HIP-45. I mean, as we now discovered, there's obviously some improvements that are possible. How would that most efficiently happen?
So HIP-45 having passed, basically you would write another HIP that would amend it and become the new law, basically, for how we govern things as this blockchain community, essentially. So and to be completely fair, how to write a HIP, how to like work through that is takes some getting used to, but there are channels in Discord dedicated to HIP writing and working on HIPs. So and just pitching an idea and getting someone to push against it. Like there's a lot of channels where you can start working on this on Discord, I'd say. But the important thing from my perspective is to make something that is scalable, or something that takes the learnings from this and is scalable to other regions that are going to go through the similar thing. But yeah, I'm happy to after the call point the specific Discord channels that I think would be the most appropriate for figuring out how to improve the HIP process.
And Lewis, we don't want to create a situation of the Helium community versus the corporates versus Helium Inc., because really we're all best working together. There's nothing to stop the corporates roaming onto AU915 Helium now, and we want that. That's great. We need those DCs over the whole network to make the whole thing financially viable. So yeah, I just want to make it clear that we do want to work with them. We just don't reckon they should be driving us like they seem to be.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to keep thinking about this, but I hear the resentment with it. It's just the question of we drafted them as people who have like a handful of people that know a lot about LoRaWAN across the world. How can they help initiate these changes, and how does HIP-45 make sure that you're in control? That's essentially the setup that it is right now. And from a design standpoint, I think that's roughly right, but maybe I'm kind of missing the mark on this. I don't know.
The existing committee that is representing all your competitors, and there's no one representing just the community.
Well, I mean, I think there's definitely room for having a community representative on the DY LoRaWAN committee. However, I would say that and I think there's room for at least 2 or 3 of them, really.
Yeah, it needs to be a significant voting group, probably half.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's and I'd say that would be, I think that's a great avenue for improvement here, actually, because I think the general mechanism of having the committee, like a smallish committee initiating a change being checked by locality, generally makes sense. but the representation on the committee is definitely skewed. So I think that that is a very like tangible, easy path towards improvement. And to be fair, like like a lot of things with blockchain, like you kind of set the thing up and then you kind of set up the governance after the fact. And so and that's how the DY board was decided. That's how the manufacturing oversight committee was established. And we're in a similar situation with the LoRaWAN working group, where we kind of arbitrarily put people forward, but is there a better way to compose that group and to elect that group and maintain that group? And that's from the DY board to the manufacturing oversight committee to this working group of LoRaWAN. There are improvements to be made on governance there, and I think that's probably the best avenue. I like having had this discussion today. I think that's probably the cleanest way to really improve things, is to come up with a concrete proposal of how to recompose that committee.
And it's pretty amazing, the thousands of decisions that Helium have made, and this is a real pioneering, Web3 model I've not come across before, and I've been in tech 30 years. So there's a lot of appreciation of what you have achieved. So yeah, don't want to be all negative.
Yeah, that's actually the thing. We are really having the momentum on the Helium side of things. I mean, things are really going the right direction. Why shoot yourself in the foot at a time of this? That's what I've and just to come back to the composition of the LoRaWAN committee, or I'm just looking at the 5 people that voted. It's a very non-diverse group of people, I might say. So I think we're very well scoped to look at getting people from other parts of the community involved in that committee.
Lewis, I'm used to standards committees having sort of 3 distinct groups of people. One would be the network operators, something in that sort of category. The next group would be the manufacturers, and the third group would represent the users, customers. And it's quite common to see that sort of 3-sided representation on standards committees. There's maybe something to think about.
Yeah, I think the committee composition is probably I think that's absolutely right. And honestly, like that kind of improvement would happen the fastest if somebody literally on this call who feels very strongly about it was drafting it. I'm happy to help you understand how to like navigate some of the HIP submission process and like what does it look like. Like just to lay it out real fast, essentially, first of all, look at a few of the HIPs that are already there, see what they look like. Once you have something that's kind of like concrete enough and straightforward enough, you go on 1 or 2 community calls and pitch it, and then it goes to a straw poll and gets voted on. But I'm happy to walk someone through that. Like I've worked on some, like some of the HIPs I've worked on have taken like 9 months to a year as well. So I'm happy to tell you about the pains and how to like go there fast. But I think like from my personal perspective, this is something I care a lot about improving as well, but there's so much on my plate already that if there's someone from this community who sees exactly what they think makes sense, that is so much easier than where I'm at, where I'm like, okay, I think I see the problem. I'm getting a good feel for it now. I might know how to navigate it, but I also have a huge backlog of things I'm supposed to be doing as well. So it's slow for me to get things done. But if there's someone who feels strongly about how to redefine the committee composition and wants to model on something that they're familiar with, for example, like that is something I'd really like to help get done.
I think we've gone over what I was thinking an hour. Is there any very pressing questions? I don't think, as Louis said, that's definitely not going to be the last call. If there's no questions, I would really like to thank you, Louis, for taking the time. This is very much highly appreciated. There's probably been some strong opinions voiced today, but none of this would be personal. We really appreciate your help in this process.
Thanks, Lewis.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate everybody who showed up today, and I appreciate, you know, everybody who spoke today. I absolutely, I don't think anyone was rude or anyone was too. You spoke your minds, and I think I really appreciate it. It helped me. Like I've known there's been friction here, and I've tried to work on a process that worked, you know, kind of resolved it. But it also means a lot more to be here with you speaking about it today and hearing exactly how it's hitting you and how there's room for improvement there. So I appreciate everybody who spent their morning. Like, I'm sure you all have work to be at, and a few of you are in your cars. I'm sure you're finding a spare moment to be on this call, and I appreciate it as well.
Thanks, Lewis.
I hope that we can get a few people together to assist in the process that you just outlined before. And yeah, let's leave it at that, I reckon.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thanks everybody for the time.
Thanks,
Lewis.
Thanks, Leo, as well. And
Thanks, guys.
And Leo.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lewis.
Thanks, Louis. Thanks, sorry, Louis, Leo. And I will speak to you soon.
Thanks for that, man.